are happy that you are here, and we are very happy that you are here to talk to us about the backgrounds of things that we might not be able to find out otherwise.
My pleasure.
Christine, you are known as an award-winning American film director and film producer, and you live in New York City.
I went to college at a school called Brown University, and I majored in semiotics. Very useful. And then I had the good fortune to come to New York in the early 80s, to come back to New York. I actually grew up in New York City. When a lot of extraordinary filmmakers were making their first movies, like Jim Jarmusch, Spike Lee, Betty Gordon, Julie Dash. So there was a real sense at that time, I realized kind of looking back, that there were up until then, there were certainly Hollywood films, Hollywood narratives, and then films that weren't Hollywood tended to be extremely experimental, almost anti-narrative. So the filmmakers I just mentioned were making movies that felt very personal, very specific kinds of voices, but also they needed production. They needed that kind of narrative support. And it really opened up my eyes. So I started working on movies as a production assistant, a location manager, a line producer, etc. And then I reacquainted myself with a friend from college named Todd Haynes. And he was working on a movie at the time, which some of you may have seen, some of you may have heard of it, maybe nobody has heard of it. But how many of you have heard of a film called Superstar, the Karen Carpenter Story? Okay, a few, okay. All right, you should almost just leave and go download it illegally from the internet now, because it'll teach you more than I possibly can. But it's a great, great movie. All to say, I saw Todd Haynes made this short film, and I had an epiphany that I wanted to keep helping him make extraordinary movies, because I really thought this is somebody who is going to change the world with the films he makes.
Did you ever, in the beginning, think that you might become a filmmaker yourself?
I am a filmmaker.
Okay, but you are mostly from the production side.
I think producers are filmmakers, aren't we?
Well,
Thank you. I'm not a director.
Okay.
I'm not a film director.
Yeah. In Europe we use and maybe also in America we use the word creative producer, and that includes, and that's of course you are, that includes like that from the production side you take a lot of decisions also that shape the film, that bring it to the screen. But let's talk about that. First, before we begin, can you raise your hand and say who is from the filmmaking side here in the audience, so that we kind of know, okay? And the rest is like critics or audience, I imagine. So please, it's a workshop or it's a masterclass, please put your hand up, raise a question while we are talking. It makes the whole thing much more worthwhile for everybody, and will drive this conversation to a much better level. So let's start. We finished just before seeing the film I shot Andy Warhol, and maybe we can see the first slide. It shows it just shows 3 stills from the film, and I would like to talk about the character study. You as a filmmaker and producer, you have made quite a few films on real stories, real characters. Maybe even half of your films are from real, I would say. Can that be?
I would think probably not at this point, but you're right. Just because there's been so many films. But we do love real life stories, yes.
And when you do a real story, I guess you have to have a certain responsibility to the authenticity of the character. So can you talk about how you go about the character studies. I guess that comes before you cast or before, maybe after the script, after the screenwrite, but there has to be somewhat a study of the character. Who are we trying to show on the screen?
Well, I would almost come from the other side to a certain degree. When we decide we want to make a movie about, usually, and for us it tends to be, frankly, it's real life characters, and often associated with some kind of event or crime, like Boys Don't Cry, I Shot Andy Warhol, or something like Velvet Goldmine, which, you know, sort of reimagines the lives of characters like, you know, real life people like David Bowie or Lou Reed or Iggy Pop without actually naming them in the film. So I guess using real life events, or of course, I'm not there. Todd Haynes' sort of, you know, meditation on Bob Dylan that never actually, the entire movie never actually says the words Bob Dylan. So, so I think it's kind of twofold. If it's a true life crime, like Boys Don't Cry, like Valerie Solanas and I Shot Andy Warhol, often it has to do with some sense that this particular event has a resonance beyond its provenance as something terrible. I mean, obviously with this film, Valerie shot a very well-known person. In Boys Don't Cry, nobody was known until the crime actually happened. So, look, this is all a long-winded way of saying sometimes making a movie is how we figure out how it's important, why it's important, and why it has that resonance. In terms of like the study of the character, you know, look, I just try to make sure a director is doing his or her best job and has the best resources I can bring to the table to make sure that happens. The script, of course, is enormously important. I had never seen a good film come out of a bad script. I've unfortunately seen bad films come out of good scripts, which is really unfortunate, but it happens. But a good film out of a bad script, never. And you know, so we have to be convinced ourselves as producers, you know, that this script has that authenticity. And of course, you're right. If it's based on a true life person or a true event, it has to have that authenticity that feels like, look, facts don't matter so much because narrative has to be the most important thing. But being true to at least the spirit of the event or the person is critical.
Does it make for you a difference if the person is still alive or has died? Does it make your life as a producer easier when it's in the past?
I don't know. You know, I don't know that it really matters. When we made the Betty Page film, The Ballad of Betty Page, which is another Mary Herron movie, Betty was still alive. When we made Mrs. Harris, about Jean Harris, who was, you guys played, this was another crime that happened in America, but she was played by Annette Bening. She was still alive, and we had a week where in the same week we showed Betty Page to Betty Page and Mrs. Harris to Mrs. Harris. And you know, my partner Pam was in the room with both of them both times. She showed Betty Page to Betty Page at the Playboy Mansion. How crazy is that? And they both had, you know, reactions that were like, you know, sometimes I felt, I'm sort of just paraphrasing things they both said, sometimes I felt like you got it absolutely right, and sometimes I kind of didn't know what you were talking about.
Mm. So let's move on to the next slide and talk about Boys Don't Cry, because I imagine that story was very much informed by police reports, because she was, as in other films too, I think one of the sources to develop the character was to take all the material that exists, and often, if it's a crime, there's police reports and interviews from the police. And you partially use it sometimes also in the film to drive the story forward. How do you, maybe we talk about Tina Brandon. How can you tell us specifically about Brandon, how you developed his character with Kimberly?
All right, so Kimberly, you know, I guess in like the early 90s, we made a movie called Go Fish with Rose Trochet. And Rose came into the office one day and she said, you know, I met this woman, she's a film student, and she is obsessed with the story of Brandon Tina. Now, the story of Brandon Tina was not a discovery by Kim Pierce. It had been published already in a couple of different journalists had already explored the story right after it happened, before the killers were even put on trial. I'm assuming you guys all know the movie, do you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, so
maybe more about the character and then the process of casting.
I'm getting there.
Good.
Kimberly originally wrote a script that she completely fictionalized. Brandon was named Lewis. That's another quiz question. Anyway, Brandon was originally named Lewis. She was trying to sort of do her own interpretation of events. But what ended up happening was it took us a very long time to raise the financing for the film. And Kimberly went back to Nebraska and started talking more and more to the people involved in Brandon's life, particularly Lana Tisdale, who had been Brandon's lover. And but then she also sat in on the actual trials of the two killers. So she got more and more information and got more and more of a sense, not just of Brandon's character, but also of like what it was like to live in that town, you know, to be a young person in that kind of a place at that time. And when she came back, she had such an overwhelming amount of rich material, it kind of started to feel that the effort to fictionalize everything was holding her back. So we said, you know, her producers said, you know, it's like, get rid of, just call him Brandon. Call her Lana. Call him Tom. Like, just go for it. Like, let's just do a story that's as true to the spirit of what we believe happened as it can possibly be.
The performance of Hilary Swank, we talked in the Q&A after the film was shown, probably makes the film. I mean, there are many other elements, but she is really outstanding in her performance. So I read on the internet that she dressed in her normal life for 4 weeks before the film shoot up as a boy and tested the environment and had a good day when she was not discovered to be a woman. How is it possible that you can give that space to a production? Because I think she's very convincing, and I realized, this is how it happened, that she could perform so well, especially because she wasn't yet such a developed actress.
You know, I mean, look, we were a very tiny production. Hilary did, you know, when Hilary came in to do her audition, her hair was down to here, and I didn't see her actual audition. I saw a videotape of it, and Kim had sent us, Kim was in Los Angeles, and she sent us 2 tapes, these are like the top 5 people. And then she was like, and then this girl just came in, but I don't know. She's a little Hollywood. She was on that TV show, because Hillary had been on a television show called Beverly Hills 90210 for about 3 episodes. So I remember, she was like, but look, I don't know, I think there's something. So I remember, before the actual audition began, she had hair down to here, and she had a cowboy hat with her. So the first thing I see her do is lift up all her hair, put the cowboy hat on, and then look up. And then I was like, oh, okay. All right. Because when she first walked in, I was like, who's that California girl? And then she began her audition, and it was, obviously incredibly compelling, but also incredibly compelling because of her natural charisma. Now, one interesting thing is when we were trying to get the film financed and we were showing people the script, the number one thing that potential financiers said, they were like, no, you know what my problem with the script is? Brendan's so unlikable. And we were like, no, he's not unlikable. He's very sympathetic. And they're like, he lies, he cheats. These people take him in, he steals from them, he lies to Lana. And of course, we were convinced that if we found the right performer, that they would be able to absolutely, elevate that character beyond that.
And you very much
Absolutely.
succeeded. So
Absolutely.
she won the Oscar, which is
She did.
yeah. And one would imagine that if an actress has so great award, that her career would just take off. But when I looked it up, she didn't really get that many roles. Do you think?
Well, she
it's
got
because-
another Oscar just a couple years later.
Yeah, but it's a long time. It's a long time. Is there, even in the film world, a stigma attached to an actress that plays a male role?
I think Kate Blanchett would say no.
Yeah, but that's also much later.
I don't think so. I think Hillary is a very kind of specific type, and I think Boys Don't Cry absolutely invented her career. What she did with that afterwards was up to her. I don't believe that playing the role had any negative effect on her whatsoever. I don't.
That's good to know.
It's my opinion. It's not the
Everybody's.
gospel, but I don't think, I think that she, look, many actors and this, make many different kinds of decisions, sometimes for the money, sometimes for the art, and sometimes they go down a path and they get stuck and then they reinvent themselves. I don't think there's a world, though, in which you can say that playing Brandon was a wrong move for Hilary Swank.
Well, it was a bit provocative, but also to find a sentiment of society and acceptance. I mean, of course, we are much further nowadays than we years before, and I think you, as a filmmaker, contributed very much to bring characters on the screen that make society think in favor of lesbian and gays and trans people. So,
Can I ask a question?
yes?
I think one of the things that you're referring to, if you go back far enough to Desert Hearts, for example, and Patricia Charbonneau, who plays a lesbian in that movie, and afterwards went on, I don't know how many speaking engagements with her baby, and tried to, really put away the lesbian tint from having played that movie. I think by the time this movie came along, it was quite different.
But also Desert Hearts, and no disrespect to that film, it didn't have the same impact as Boys Don't Cry.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I feel like by getting anointed by the Academy, look, we don't want to turn this into like,
No.
what should Hilary Swank have done differently in her career? Which movie should she have turned down? Because we all, because it's so good, we're all, I'm glad we're all so smart about, who knows? I can't accept that it didn't help her enormously, but that's a good point.
I have a second question for Boys Don't Cry because I grew up in Saskatchewan, which is just above Nebraska, and I know that small town way of life, and it's, when I came out of Boys Don't Cry, I was crying because it was just so close to what my life was like there. And the question for me is, how do you create a movie that is based on this kind of reality with the same names and the same thing and not have Nebraska up in arms?
Well, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to give you legal advice.
No, I don't want legal advice.
But the fact is that, when a crime gets committed, it kind of becomes a matter of public record. So, in some ways, by being part of a crime, you kind of give up your right to privacy to a certain degree. The only way in the States, and I have no idea how it works here, which is why I'm being so sensitive, because I don't want someone to say, well, I took your advice and now I'm in jail in Zurich because I libeled somebody. So, but essentially we didn't libel anybody. I mean, everything that happens is a matter of public record. What Kimberly did is what we have a lot of directors do, including Mary Herron, where she had to annotate her script and say, this is where I got this information, this is where I got that information, so that's how you can do it, and we got Lana Tisdale's life rights, for example, but again, there were things that were a matter of public record. Lana Tisdale decided later that she did not, that she said, I don't want, it was devastating for me that people in my shitty little town thought I was having a lesbian affair. But she had testified to that, she had told the police that, so it wasn't like we were making up, it wasn't like if we had said, for example, that she was abusing a child, then she would have had grounds to come after us on the movie because that was something that could have hurt her, in her career or whatever, and it wasn't true, and we pulled it out of nowhere or whatever. But we were only talking and dramatizing things that were a matter of public record. Does that make sense?
Maybe we go on with the next slide, and we stay with Boys Don't Cry one more time, because I want to ask you as a filmmaker, like you seem to be attracted to give the class or class conditions of the American poor a voice. Do you feel like that cinema should do that, or that your cinema should do that?
Oh boy. I mean, look, we tell the stories that are exciting and provocative and interesting to us. And yes, often that involves giving voice to people that may not have a voice. But, some of the arguments that we got into at dinner last night is about the fact that ultimately, for me, in the United States, film is a commercial art form. And I have to walk that line of art and commerce. Now, luckily for me, I think that's a really cool line to walk. I think it's really amazing to me that I can make a movie like Boys Don't Cry, and it doesn't feel homeworky or spinachy, but it feels like compelling and dramatic and an experience that you want to have. So that's the trick. I don't ever want to make a movie that feels good for you, because who wants to see that? Sometimes I will see, movies when I'm trying to decide what I want to see, and you guys, everybody has their own, what makes you want to go see a film? What makes you actually leave your house to go see a film rather than just, press your Netflix button. But even that's a big deal, because you're choosing to see one thing over another thing. So I don't want to ever see a movie that I feel is going to teach me something. I don't want movies to teach me something. I want them to be a great experience. And if I come out of that enriched, enlightened about something that I didn't know about, that's great.
I mean, I do believe that we all go to cinemas to experience
Exactly.
a world that we don't know. However, I'm not sure if an ending that kind of leaves you in despair as an audience necessarily is always the best. It depends on the story, of course. But because you say no happy ends, that I would like to question that a little bit.
But it's hard in Boys Don't Cry to come up with a happy ending.
No, you can't. There is no happy end.
We did our best. Yeah, but we tried, because we wanted to give people a sense coming out of that Brandon's story wasn't for nothing. You know what I mean? And so that letter at the end was an attempt to say, okay, this terrible thing happened, and he's dead. But somehow other people will find some kind of solace in this story, and I believe that has played out to be the truth.
So let's move on with the next slide. You are a voice for the lesbians, and in your films, in some of your films, and I want to compare, like, from your experience, like, what is different to make Go Fish, a totally different film than Carol, but both are lesbian stories. Like, what has changed in those 2 years for films with lesbian reality, that show lesbian realities?
Wait, in which years, though, do you mean?
Now we start with Go Fish.
Okay, because that's like 20 years between Go Fish and Carol.
And Carol, yeah. In 20 years, yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's kind of unfair to compare the movies, because they're both so
totally different.
So extraordinary, yeah. I think, in their own right. But like, I mean, look, Go Fish was Rose Trochet and Gwen Turner sort of saw, I mean, this was the early 90s, when there was virtually no gay and lesbian representation, certainly not in mainstream Hollywood, but very little on screen whatsoever. And here's my art and commerce. So I had made 2 films already. I hadn't made many movies at that point, but I'd made Swoon and Poison, and it became clear that at that time, if you made a movie that had gay content and you marketed it just to a gay audience, and you made it for the right amount of money, it could be profitable. It could make its money back. Now, that was an incredibly empowering thing to discover. Now, Poison, which I assume some of you have seen at least, right?
It will be shown also afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Poison is an extremely experimental film. I mean, it's an amazing movie, but it's very experimental. Gay and lesbian people flocked to it because there wasn't anything else. And frankly, half of them came out going, what the fuck was that? I mean, we can't really assume that the gay and lesbian audience is smarter than the straight audience, right? I mean, we hope that they are, but they aren't always. And I just remember sometimes, because I would often go just to see people come out of my films, and I just, like, these poor guys, like, I just wanted to see some boys kissing, and then I had to see all this other stuff. So all I'm trying to say, though, is that was an incredibly empowering feeling. And for
the lesbians, like also Go Fish, yeah.
Let me continue.
Okay.
Because
we want to know.
So Go Fish came to me. Gwen and Rose sent me a videotape that was like, dear Christine Vachon, here's our movie. We need help finishing it. So I looked at it and I thought, wow, this is so charming. This is so fun. And it's so, again, it's like, it starts in a space after everybody's already out. Like, the story's not about, like, am I not, what's gonna happen? You know, but that's all we had up until then. So I did figure out a way, and that's, you know, it's its own, like, 2-hour masterclass. I did figure out a way to get them the money to finish the film. And the movie was enormously successful. It went to the Sundance Film Festival. It was bought by the Samuel Goldwyn Company before they went out of business. And I remember sitting at a table with the virtually all-white, all-male people who worked at the Samuel Goldwyn Company, and they said, we love this movie, we're so excited we have it, let's start on a marketing plan together. They all had their notebooks out, and they were like, so, what cities have a lot of lesbians in them? And I was like, Northampton? I don't know. But they were, you know, they kind of jumped right into it, and the movie was actually a huge financial success, and way more financially successful than anything I had done before.
I mean, it is really, I think it covers because I lived in Chicago in the 80s, and I mean,
and that's where it was made.
Yeah, so it's really like, it really is the spirits of the time in a very charming, fun way, with a style that is comes straight out of art school, the experimental
Absolutely.
world, and I think congratulations that you saw this, because you make so many different genres, but it seems like you have a good feeling of like seeing what it is also for its style.
I also knew it was commercial. That's the thing. I was like, you know what? People are going to want to see this. And I remember also at that same, you know, every movie I make gets attacked by some faction of the gay and lesbian audience, and I remember, you know, at some, you know, an older lesbian saying to me first, an older lesbian who's probably younger than me, but an older lesbian saying to me, there weren't enough older lesbians in the movie, and I was like, okay, I'm sorry, we tried. And then she said, and don't you think that like men are gonna go see this movie and like get off on it? And I was like, I hope so. And I hope a lot of them go. And I guess a lot of them did, because this movie made a lot of money.
So let's move on to Carol.
Oh, you know?
20 years later. Next slide, please. There she is. I know you can't compare it. It's a totally different spirit. It comes out of not showing yourself, but it's with big money, big industry behind. Tell us, was it difficult to make this film?
It wasn't, but I also have to put in, it wasn't for me. I have to put in, you know, a disclaimer, which is, I got to do the easiest part of Carol. Carol had been developed, not by me, for many years, by a couple of different producers. I remember first hearing about it. I mean, first of all, you know, I think the book got reissued in English in the late 80s, right? Something like that, with a foreword by Patricia Highsmith. And that then me and a lot of my friends read it. We'd all read a lot of Highsmith, like Ripley and all of her really like kind of nasty film noirs. But Carol isn't that, you know? And when The Price of Salt was originally published, the original title of Carol, it was under a pseudonym. It wasn't even under her name. So it got reissued under Patricia Highsmith's name with a foreword where she kind of explained a little bit why she wrote it. And so I read it at that time. And a lot of people I knew read it, a lot of people were talking about it. Then there was a producer named Dorothy Berwin who tried to bring it to the screen. And that script, even I think it had Rose attached to it at one time. Somehow the story wasn't quite cracked. which was part of it, and maybe also part of it was the world ready yet for this kind of a love story between two women? And then eventually the rights expired or what have you, and you know the Highsmith estate is not an easy estate, and my old friend Elizabeth Carlson, she went after the rights.
But she's English.
She's English.
Yeah.
Actually, she's American, but most people think she's English. So,
Okay. She lives in England.
She lives in England.
Okay.
But so she went after the rights, and I think it was a very difficult process. She finally got them. Phyllis Nage, who had worked with both Liz and I on this Mrs. Harris movie that I talked about earlier with Annette Bening, wrote a very strong script. And Liz set out to produce it with first the director John Crowley, who dropped out, and then the director Phillida Lloyd, who also dropped out. Along the way, Elizabeth attached Kate Blanchett. Okay, so then poor Elizabeth one day wakes up, she has Kate Blanchett in a very narrow window, and she no longer has her director. And we were on the phone, really just having a conversation as two producers do, because, you know, people tell us we aren't filmmakers, so we have to commiserate with each other. And she said, "Can you believe it? I lost my director on Carol." And I was like, "Yeah, you know, in the movie I thought I was going to make with Todd, we're not making either." And then we were both like, "Huh." And I showed the script to Todd, and he committed to it 3 days later. So the hard work was really done before me. Making the movie certainly wasn't easy, it was super ambitious, but I know how to make Todd's movies. And that's what I was there to do. And so ultimately, for Liz Carlson, it was, I'd say, a 10-year journey. For me, it was 6 months.
And you basically bought or got Kate Blanchett with the deal.
We got Kate with the deal.
And is that for you super important that you have like a star on the?
Well, yeah.
Is it like because we compare like these 20 years, is it nowadays more important than it was 20 years ago, or was it always, if you played in that category, that you had to have a known actress and a known actor?
It depends on your budget. I mean, if it's a Go Fish, if you put a star in Go Fish, it would have been like, what the hell is she doing here? You know? But I mean, but that was a movie made for nothing, and it was made. If Go Fish was made today, it'd be shot on an iPhone.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. No, but let's stay with Carol.
But Carol, to justify its budget, and to really, you know, look, I always talk about what's the path to the makeability of a movie. And the path has to be, again, what I said a few minutes ago, what makes you want to see it? Most of the time, when you say to people, what makes you want to see a movie, it's usually because I love Martin Scorsese films or Todd Haynes films or Mary Herron's films or whatever, and I love Julianne Moore, Kate Blanchett, Rooney Mara, whatever. That's what gets you there. So for a story like this, look, Kate Blanchett absolutely was essential, but I also know that with somebody like Todd Haynes, with his reputation, we would get any actor we wanted. The real trick would have been if it wasn't Todd. What if it was somebody new, you know, who didn't have any kind of track record? Then that would have been a whole different discussion, you know?
But are you as connected with the film world and the world of actors and actresses, you can just call them?
Some of them, yeah.
Yeah? Okay. And what do you have to do to kind of keep in that circle?
Keep making good movies. Because, I mean, seriously, I'm like, you know, I assume at this point, 120 movies in, that if I reach out to Kate or Julianne or Rooney or whoever and say, I have a really good part for you, they're going to believe me. you know?
Yeah, you have proven.
Yes.
I mean, for many, many, many years,
Yes.
in many different ways. Yeah. So, so you are in advantage in a way because you're an established, very established.
Right, but I'm
person.
not, I just want to be clear. I don't live in Los Angeles. I don't go out to dinner with movie stars. I don't do any of that. I'm not in that circle. I just make good movies, and because of that, I have an access. And when they see our name, hopefully, but that doesn't mean they always do what I want. God, that would be great. That's not what happens.
I have another question. With Carol, I found that the other character was a little bit ingenue, she seems young.
You mean Rooney?
Yes.
Okay.
Was that intentional?
Well, again, we were being very true to the spirit of the book. And one of the things, and yes, in the book, Therese it's almost as if, and this was kind of one of the exciting things, I think, to Todd, she doesn't even have the language to really express what's happening to her. It's like she has no frame of reference, no, and in some ways, Todd said, well, that's kind of the most exciting thing of all, which I think in many ways is what makes that love story, because at its heart, Carol works because it's a great love story. I don't think it works necessarily because it's a great lesbian love story. That's icing on the cake, you know, for us. But it works because it's a great love story. And part of that is that sense of discovery and falling down a rabbit hole that you didn't even know was there.
Okay, I didn't find that being
That may not have worked for you.
so central in the book as it was in the movie.
I think it is. I mean, I've read the book about 100 times now.
Okay.
I'm not trying to like,
That's
I'm
fine.
just saying that I think if you read it again, you'd actually be surprised at how naive that character is.
Can we have the next slide? It's still about Carol. Carol is a period film. It plays in the 50s. And so it is, you have to recreate a world in the past, not just in the characters, but also, of course, in the setting, and it's done amazingly in that film. I know we all enjoy the costumes and the outfit, so how much is there from your side? Is it bringing in the right people, or is it how do you go about to do the set design and the costume design?
Well, you know, it is a big part is location, and you know, figuring out, like, the decision to not shoot Carol in New York City was a big decision, and that decision was made because our budget was relatively low, and the fact was that 1950s New York doesn't really exist in New York. It's gone. So how could we find another place that gave us enough of a feeling that we wouldn't have to spend so much money trying to, you know, because with a period movie, what you're always trying to figure out is, how can I have something that I don't have to completely transform, you know? And sometimes you just do. Sometimes you do just have to completely transform it. But that's what costs money.
Well, the Europeans go to Eastern Europe
Well, so
for
do
the
we.
sets.
So do we. I last spring in Budapest.
Yeah. Okay. But anyway,
So,
the location.
right, but we couldn't have shot this in Budapest because that's where you go for, you know, turn of the century Paris, which is why we went there. But Cincinnati hadn't been shot in that often, and we went and looked at it, and interestingly enough, it was built on a similar grid system as New York City. It even had begun to build a subway system that they never completed. There were just a lot of elements that felt like, okay, we can build around this, we can make this work. So that was number one. Shooting a period film is always a challenge because it's all about what you see in the frame. So when a director is walking down the street and they're saying, you know, this is what I want to see, you want to push their hands together. Because, you know, what you want to, like, oh my gosh, if we see down that street, that's another $25,000, you know? So how important is it? How important is it? And with a director like Todd, he's so cognizant of that, that he has a very strong sense of like, I'm going to see just here and nothing else. So we'll concentrate on this, you know, amount of square footage, this amount of real estate, and make it perfect. But I promise I won't move the camera in any other direction.
But I read also that the editing was like maybe 7 months or so, and it was also because there was so, it's anyways.
I know on the internet it must be true,
No,
but the editing was not 7
But
months.
no, maybe it wasn't not the editing, but the post-production, and the reason for that, it said, is that there was a lot of special effects to kind of get rid in the off-frame of modern stuff. So
Right.
I mean,
we finished shooting the film in the spring of like 2015 or something, I can't remember exactly, and it was really done in the fall, but then we decided to wait for Cannes. So there was a long period of where the film just kind of sat there. Yes, though, you're right, the special effects, the visual effects for the most part in Carol were to create New York, you know, like, I think we do create at a certain point the cityscape, the skyline.
Yeah, the skyline, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then just to get rid of like the stuff you can't get rid of in the frame. You know, like a lamppost that's not period, you know, or a mailbox or things that you can't physically lift, a parking meter, stuff like that.
And it was shot on Super
16.
Super 16. That is a wild decision in 2012.
Well, it wasn't
2015,
right.
even wilder, 2015.
Yep.
And it paid off.
I mean, it paid off. Look, I don't always, we just shot another movie on film, Box Lux, Brady Corbett's new film with Natalie Portman and Jude Law, and it made me nuts to shoot it on 35 because, you know, there's like one lab that'll process it. And I personally don't always think it makes such a big difference, but the directors do. And if they feel that passionately about it, we support it, and we support it as much as we can. I can't make more film labs go into business, and I can't stop the fact that, like, when you do shoot on film, you know, it used to be, when I started out, you shot on film and you physically would bring the negative, you know, what you shot to the film lab. And you'd see them take it, and you knew it was all good. And now we're putting it on airplanes, and there's often 2 or 3 days before we even know if it's gotten there and it's okay. So I don't love from, not just from a production point of view, but I think it can be very stressful on production.
I said maybe camera people in the audience want to ask something about that, because that film has a really special look. I think it helps the story to make you feel the 50s.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I just, you know, the stress that goes into it is very difficult.
Yeah. I read that there was 10-minute standing ovation in Cannes when you showed it.
Yep.
And that film is a success story, isn't it?
It is. I mean, look, Carol did not get a Best Picture nomination, and I think that was pretty devastating for a lot of the people involved. We did get 6 other nominations, so it's hard to sit here and complain. It was one of the last successful movies of the Weinstein Company, and there was a lot of stuff going on there that we didn't know about at the time in terms of their lack of... Sorry?
Me Too?
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about their Although I know Kate Blanchett has come out as saying she thinks that did have an effect on the film's box office. I'm not sure if that's one of those like 2020 hindsights. I'm speaking more pragmatically. They had no money, so the film's ability, had an enormous impact in New York and Los Angeles, but then really faltered getting out to the rest of America because the company simply didn't have the money to support it in terms of advertising, booking cinemas, etc. So I think that had a profound effect on its ultimate ability to be as successful as it could have been.
It's shown in the airplanes, but they cut out the sex scene, I read.
That's what people tell me, yes.
Delta did, American Airlines didn't.
I don't know what to say.
But I know your answer, but I've asked anyways, like, as a lesbian, I'm concerned about a man directing a sex scene of two women. Were you?
Nope.
Do you want to elaborate on that?
Look, are we really going to become these filmmakers who say, men can't direct women, women can't direct men,
No, it's about
only
sex
gay
scenes.
only gay people can direct gay people, only men, I just can't accept that.
But were you on the set kind of to make sure he did a good job?
Have you ever met Todd Haynes? I mean, honestly, he
Yeah, but
is the most, it's just like, it's not about, to me, it's not about like whether somebody's male or female. It's about whether or not they personally have that kind of sensibility and sensitivity to work with actors. Todd, I think, puts at ease any, actors, and he's an incredibly sensitive, soft-spoken, gentle, empathetic person. I think both Rooney and Kate would have walked to the end of the world with him, and he listens to them, as any great director does for any sex scene, no matter who's directing it. They really listen to their actors and try to make sure that the actors are comfortable, that they feel that what they're doing is authentic, that they feel like that it feels right with them. I've worked with male directors directing male sex scenes who haven't made their actors feel that way. And I've worked with women working with women who haven't made their actors. I mean, I'm just saying, like, it's the person. It's not their sexuality. It's not, I don't accept the notion that a man can't understand, how to direct a sex scene between two women, the same way I don't accept the idea that a woman can't direct a sex scene between two men. I just don't accept that.
You have worked so many years with Todd Haynes together. Is it like a relationship where you blindly kind of do this and the other one understands? Is it like, is it to that degree?
To some degree. I mean,
it's like 40 or 35 years you worked
probably
together.
30,
And how many
years.
films have you made together?
I mean, I guess it's not really, it's, Poison, Safe, Velvet Goldmine, Mildred Pierce.
I'm not there.
I'm Not There.
Next slide, please.
Carol, and then some crazy other little things. We just did a Givenchy commercial, so I guess that counts. But we have a sort of constant, dialogue about what he's doing, what he's going to do next, and what our best way to approach it is.
Are there any questions to the film of Carol? Yes, please.
Not to the film of Carol.
Okay, then any other question?
I have a question about the audience. How in your reflection in production, what is your thought about audience? Like you told before about which movie is that? About the LGBT, that it was good that you had this lesbian community that was very good in production way. How about I Am Not There, for example? What is the audience? Are you looking for an audience when you decide to produce a movie? Yeah. You understood me?
I do, and I'm so happy you asked that question because I love to answer this question. The answer is we think about the audience from the very beginning. And in terms of figuring out what our path to production is, what our path to makeability is, it's all about who the hell is this movie for? And I love to answer this question in Europe because I often feel like European filmmakers don't think that way. And it's often a difficult discourse that I have with my colleagues in Europe. And again, it comes back to art versus commerce. With something like I'm Not There, that was a movie, like if you're sort of adding up a little, like, okay, how are we going to figure this out? How are we going to get this financed? Well, it's about Bob Dylan, one of the biggest stars in the world, right? Okay, yeah, but it's like, it's a totally fractured story. And Todd is taking a lot of chances on the way he's telling this story that we may or may not be able to convince financiers will work. All right, well then we got to get movie stars. That's how this is going to work. We have to get real movie stars. So that's the kind of like, that's a very simplistic way of talking about it. But we also knew we had a musical element. You know, almost as big as producing that film was producing the soundtrack to that film and convincing artists, you know, of that stature to participate in that soundtrack. So we think about not just the audience from the very beginning, but also how we're going to reach them, how we're going to market this, what is the poster going to look like, what's the trailer going to look like, you know, how are we going to get to those people. In some ways, when I tell that story about Poison and Swoon and Go Fish and how empowering it was to realize that I could make a movie for a certain budget and not have to break out of the, you know, gay and lesbian audience, and how empowering that was. At that time, it was easy because, you know, it was like shooting fish in a barrel. It was, you know, gay and lesbian people, there were bars, there were newspapers. There wasn't this vast internet where you get to choose and say, you know, not only is my movie, my little movie, competing against other little movies, it's competing against the history of cinema. You know, it's like you could decide tonight, well, I could watch Christine's new little lesbian film, or I could watch, you know, Fassbinder. You know, so it's really become a more challenging time, which means it's even more important and more critical for us to keep thinking from the very beginning. How do we get people to notice us?
So that was kind of what I was thinking with talking about the casting. If you have somebody like Kate Blanchett, you get people to choose it because she's known as an actress. And what was why did you choose her for the role of Bob Dylan? Like, what made you think that she would be the best, besides that she has a big name?
I mean, I don't know how to answer that, because she was the best.
She was, clearly.
Right.
I mean, she's so convincing, but I mean, now we know, but you
were
were there before the film was made.
Todd had written the script, and he was like, you know what, I think Jude, which was Kate Blanchett's name in the movie, I think he should be played by a woman, and it has to be Kate Blanchett. And then we had, you know, a year of like, you know, I mean, that's a big, daring part.
Decision, yes.
And she was, you know, she was totally into it and totally terrified, I think. And she had some other movies before ours. And I was like, uh-oh, too much time to think about it, you know? And look, eventually she decided to do it. And she's extraordinary. And that's, look, you know, the second Todd said that, I saw it 100%.
Mm. So who knows that film, I'm Not There? It's a very astonishing film. The question, of course, is how did you get the rights to the music?
You know, it was actually not that difficult. Todd has had a history of making movies without the rights to music, right? Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story. The reason you haven't seen that film is because he never got the rights to the Carpenter songs. Then when we made Velvet Goldmine, we didn't have the rights to the David Bowie songs. Thank you so much. And David Bowie never gave them to us. So, so before he wrote the Dylan script, he said to me, let's see if we can get the rights first, because I just don't want to go through that again. So I called our agent at the Creative Artists Agency, CAA, and I said, how do I even begin? And the agent said, oh, you know what you should do? You should go to Jesse Dillon, Bob Dylan's son, and tell him that he can be a producer on the movie. So I go to Jesse Dillon, who turns out to be a terrific guy, and he's like, you don't have to make me a producer on the movie. Because honestly, my father doesn't do what I say, you know. He doesn't do what I tell him to do. But he has this business manager who's really great, who I can introduce you to, and he is the key. So I go to see the business manager, his name is Jeff Rosen, and Jeff Rosen was like, this sounds like a great idea, because Todd already had this concept of like, I want this, you know, seven different characters to play Bob Dylan. It sounds like a great idea. Put it on paper and give me VHS copies of all your movies, because when Bob's on the bus, he watches movies on VHS. And we did. So we gave him a pile of, you know, I was like, do we still have any VHS tapes of anything? Okay, good. Gave them to the manager, and a couple weeks later, he said he's into it. He'll let you do it. And that's a simple explanation, because there was, you know, the record label and the publishing and all of that. But we really were allowed a tremendous amount of freedom with the catalog. We had a concept to bring in other artists to cover the songs, which of course Jeff was very excited about, because it meant another way of exploiting, you know, the work of his client. So it was kind of a win-win for everybody.
Mm. I mean, you made other films where music plays a big part.
We like that, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Vox Lux, the movie that we just wrapped, all original score by Sia.
Okay, when does that come out?
I don't know, it's not done yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Soon.
so it's just in,
Right,
okay.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we go to slide 10 now, and because I think if Todd and you hadn't made Poison, I don't think that film I'm Not There would have had that daring approach of like Poison, which, because I want to spend a few minutes talking about it, because it's a film that is shown after this
Right.
screening, and I think it's a very, very important film for your career, for both of your careers. It
was the first one.
It was the first one, and it was in the time of AIDS. Nobody knew that there will be a cure, and there was a lot of misinformation about what AIDS is. If you look at a person with AIDS, you might get deceased. I mean, difficult times. And I think the Poison is a film consisting out of 3 films, if I
Yes,
get it
that
right.
are cut together, and it's true, Velvet Goldmine kind of uses that approach to a certain degree, and so does I'm Not There. One of Todd's favorite things to do is to play with identity and an audience's identification with certain characters, and how to manipulate that, but also, I'll tell you one of the things that I love about working with Todd is nobody respects the audience more than he does, and nobody believes in the intelligence of his audience more than he does. And he loves to try these experiments that he's like, they'll be with me, they'll be there, they'll be right with me as I move from time frame to time frame, or from theme to theme. They're going to be there with me, and they're going to understand the way these different stories butt up against each other to create something else new and different.
So it's also different styles.
Absolutely.
I mean, there is a black and white 50 style science fiction next to a documentary, mockumentary style next to a drama. And I think do you think like when we look at it today, we have to see it as a historical piece?
I don't. I mean, I feel like in the tradition of the gay and lesbian community attacking every single thing we ever did, Poison was attacked for not being enough about AIDS, and you kind of have to understand, I suppose you can talk about it as a historical piece in terms of understanding its context, which was, it was made at the height of the AIDS crisis, which was a very, very difficult, horrible time, and it was an artistic response to the kind of fear and insanity that kind of permeated all of our lives. And then he made Safe, which in some ways took on the AIDS crisis metaphorically even more head-on, but got excoriated even more for not actually saying AIDS, and this film doesn't either. Poison begins with the words, "The whole world is dying of panicky fright." And that, to me, then and now, it's AIDS, it's Trump, it's whatever you want to call it. So I don't feel like the film necessarily has to live in the early 90s when we were literally looking across the room, at an ACT UP meeting and realizing that those two people weren't there because they had died.
But do you feel like, when you said that you look at audience, or you think of audiences when you start to think about a film, is it the American audience you look at, or is it, how is the reception, like of Poison, in Berlin, let's say, versus London or New York? Or can you say something about playing or thinking films internationally?
It's probably more relevant to talk about how we think internationally now than we did back then.
Yeah, but maybe we start back then, because I think there was more of the globalization hadn't made us, gave us the access that we have today.
Right, but actually back then, believe it or not, I feel like, and Tees, you can actually help me answer this. I feel like back then, in a funny way, it was more receptive to American independence, right?
I think so, definitely.
You
and
know.
it was in Berlin at the world premiere. It was a huge, huge success because it was so unusual. It was really a brand new movie which no one has seen till then. It was something really new.
And it felt like there weren't so many, cable channels hadn't exploded in Europe yet, and there just seemed to be more of an interest and mandate in acquiring films like Poison. It actually did really well internationally.
Yeah, and I mean, there weren't so many films yet. We were thirsty for
Right.
films, and now we are almost overfed.
Now there's too many.
Yeah, too many, yeah. So, back to the question, when you conceive a film now, or when you think of a film now,
Yes.
do you think of
Yes.
pleasing the whole world, or the Western
Yes.
world, or?
I mean, we know we can't please the whole world, but we have to figure out, if a film, every movie we think, does this have an international life, or does it only have a life in America? And that will have an effect on the kind of money we feel we can put together for it. And look, at the end of the day, it's not like rocket science. Movies, there's a perceived value of a movie in the marketplace. It's not like I'm pulling a number out of the air. Like, I want $4 million for Still Alice. We made Still Alice for $4 million because that's what the marketplace told us it was worth. And how does the marketplace come up with that? through a kind of alchemy of, well, the director isn't really that well known. It was Wash Westmoreland and Richard Glatzer, who hadn't really had an international success, or they hadn't in some time. So that's a little like a, oh, but it's Julianne. Okay, it's a book that was translated into virtually every language. It's based on a novel. Okay, well that's good, but it is depressing. Bad. So how do you put that all together and figure out what is the perceived value of something? Now, for us, a lot of it, we do a lot of foreign pre-sales on our films to establish that value, which is a pain in the ass, and that's a whole other masterclass, which I won't bore you with. But what is involved in that is getting people who buy films for their countries, you know, to have such a sense of urgency about this particular movie that they're going to buy it before it's even made. So that means relationships with the people who buy in countries, you know, like your country, like Italy, France, Spain, England, etc., and having them say, yes, your notion of what the value of your movie is, we agree with you, and we will pay that amount of money. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a bit like crowdfunding today. It's more building up the community.
It's not like crowdfunding.
But it is that you are trying to get the community, not the money.
No, I'm trying to get the distributors. I'm trying to get,
Yeah,
like
but
Matisse used to do. He was one of the people we would go to, and he would say, and he would say sometimes, it won't work for me in Switzerland. Right? I mean, that's probably never in my films, right? But you probably said it to other films because you knew who your audience was. That's the thing. We would sell the movies to people who would say, we love Todd Haynes, but this won't work for us in Italy. It just won't. At a certain point, somebody like Todd gets an international reputation to the point where people will just perceive value in his film because of who he is. But then when you're talking about a brand new filmmaker, like Boys Don't Cry, no foreign sales. We didn't even bother to go down that road because who the hell would be interested? The only way that movie was going to be successful was if it did exactly what it did, which is be really good and win an Oscar.
When you have several projects, I imagine, in the pipeline all the time.
Yes.
You have to, that's part of your job. Or
It's also how we make a living.
That's how you make a living, yeah. There must be films where your heart is more for it, and other films where you see the money.
That's actually not true.
No?
No. We made a decision a long time ago that we weren't going to make movies for the money because I think that takes you down a very difficult, different path. Hey, if they make money, if they make big money, we are happy. And we don't make stupid decisions. I don't go after films that I know have no audience. But you know, I mean, I don't know how many different films to reference here because I don't know how many of them. Has anybody seen a film called Beatrice at Dinner?
Yeah.
Okay, a couple of people. Okay, the people who aren't Swiss. Okay, but that's a movie that's a very American film, so it may not have worked outside of its borders. But that's a movie that we made for very little money, and we didn't make much on it. But we did it because it was a movie that was made before Trump was elected that starred Salma Hayek and ended up feeling like a film very much about what life under Trump was like. So it felt we had a sense of political urgency to make it. And we knew that we were going to make it kind of at a loss, but we thought if we made it, that if it was as strong as we hoped it would be, that it would be a success, and it was. So we don't ever make a film just to get paid, ever.
Can we have the last slides? Slide, please. You have a company, now the last one, please, which is number 13. Yeah. This is your company. I don't know what year it is. I took it out of your book, which I hope
Yeah, that was a
some of
long time ago.
You
First
are.
of all, I don't have that many employees anymore.
You're smaller now.
Much smaller.
And you make more films than then, with a
Correct.
smaller group.
Correct.
Mhm. And who knows the book? Is there any producer? So this book is basically telling you of your daily life. You are incredibly industrious, ambitious, broad. How do you manage a private life?
I don't know. I guess it is that old axiom, like if you really do what you really like, everything kind of follows afterwards, and you figure it out. I mean, the moment this stops being a pleasure for me, I hope I have the means to stop doing it. Because up until now, it really is the best job in the world.
You are doing it so well. You must do it because out of the way you are.
I get to talk to extraordinarily creative people. I get to for example, Paul Schrader's film, his new movie is coming out in the States in 2 weeks. First Reformed, with Ethan Hawke and Amanda Seyfried. And I think Paul Schrader is an extraordinary filmmaker who has not had the opportunity to make an extraordinary film for some time. And getting to be part of that was really amazing. But also, we're making a film with Janixa Bravo, who's a young filmmaker that we didn't discover, but we helped move her from a terrific short filmmaker who had a great web following into a feature film director, and we're getting to make her next film. And they're at opposite ends of the spectrum, but also they're not. They're just great voices whose creative lives we get to be part of.
We have maybe time for 1 or 2 questions, and then we have to wrap it up. Yeah.
Yeah, and how do you deal with this whole new development on the internet with movies, with the, are you actually, with your production company, reaching out into this whole area?
What do you mean whole new development?
Well, not only Netflix, but also just the access to, the incredible, prolific, ridiculous competition of YouTube and the amazing amount of access now.
I mean, we just have to figure out how to make things that are noisy enough to stand out.
Okay.
And again, it comes back again to that notion of who is the audience? How do we get to them? And sometimes the answer is, well, you're not going to get to them in a movie theater. Sometimes we're like, you know what? This movie, we made a movie called Goat, which I really love, which is about a terrible fraternity hazing at a U.S. university. It probably didn't have much of a foreign life because, you guys don't experience that in the same way. But the fact is that it was a big hit amongst young people. Young people wanted to watch it on Netflix or on VOD. They don't go to the movies the same way that older people do. Art house audience in America, it's old. I mean, it is 50 and over. So it's really, you kind of have to start walking that line and figuring out, if you're going to make something that's not a franchise and you're determined for it to be theatrical, you really have to justify that.
There's one question here and then one question back there.
Yesterday, before the opening of 7 Days, the moderator called you like the holy mother of the new queer cinema. So we know that time is history, and I would like to know if do you think that movement could have happened today?
Do I think that new queer cinema could have happened today? But that's just, who knows? There's probably something else happening today that's relevant to today. That's the thing. I imagine there's a tremendous amount of extraordinary storytelling that's happening that I don't know about because I'm too damn old, It's I feel like there's probably, stories being told. The same way we thought we were so radical and we weren't asking for permission and we were just going out and telling our stories. I'm sure that's happening, and I feel lucky every time I kind of get to get a glimpse of that. So I think it is happening today.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Blaž, I'm from Slovenia. I really liked the miniseries you did, Mildred Pierce.
Thank you.
After one of my favorite diva films with John Crawford. What was the decision behind making Mildred Pierce, remaking it, and then making it also as a miniseries?
Well, I think the real key point to your question is we didn't remake it because
It's more closer to the book.
it's very close to the book. And the book and the Joan Crawford movie were extremely different. The Joan Crawford film was a film noir. And even though James M. Cain was known for doing film noirs, like The Postman Always Rings Twice and Double Indemnity, Mildred Pierce actually wasn't. And in fact, when Todd gave it to me to read for the weekend and said, this is what I want to do it for television, it's a domestic drama, it's a very slim novel, and I started reading it, and he called me, halfway through the weekend and was like, what do you think? And I said, it's great, but when does the murder happen? And he said, there is no murder, that's the whole point. Because the movie begins with a murder, like every film noir does. And what Todd wanted to do in his version was really take, James M. Cain's Anomaly, this like kitchen sink drama, and turn it into something that had tremendous resonance, economic crisis, a brand new president, all these things that we were going through at the time. And also, of course, Kate Winslet didn't hurt it.
So we have to come to an end. Maybe we put the last slide on. Christine, you will get an award tomorrow. We all will be here. It's after the film at 5 o'clock.
Oh, right, My Days of Mercy, which is sort of a premiere. Yeah.
It's a premiere, it's a
Right.
Swiss premiere,
Right.
and afterwards we will celebrate you, and it has
Excellent.
been wonderful to have you here. Thank
My
you
pleasure.
so much.
Thank you.